Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. 19. I've got no rhythm. And today I want to do a catch up on what's been going on in my life. A week or two ago, I made myself vulnerable to the community on BookTube by talking about 4 literary white whales, 4 books that have defeated me and taunt me. And that I've never managed to get around to reading. And the response from the community was mostly encouraging and warm. And I'll leave a link to below to some of the people who took this as an opportunity to share also their literary white whales. But there was one response in particular which was not so encouraging. Somebody who, for the avoidance of any court action, will remain Steve Donoghue, took the opportunity to book shame me, humiliate me about one of the books I hadn't read, and threatened to divorce me if I didn't instantly go out and read 1984. I had no other choice. I'm currently under a self-imposed book buying ban, and so I had to scrabble around to find a copy. Fortunately, my wife works at a semester abroad program here in Israel. American students come and study and have to continue their studies, and so she has a library in her office of all the books that are assigned to kids in America, and they come here and they have to pick these up. So I instantly sent her a message saying, get me a copy of 1984 by George Orwell, and she did. This comes from, say, the library in my wife's office. It's a Signet Classic, which is a particularly ugly, sort of taller than norm paperback, or maybe not as wide. These are ugly things. This has been well read, so this must have been read by a number of students over the years and turned back into their class teacher and back on the shelf in my wife's office. And I read 1984, so thank you, Steve Donoghue, for the encouragement. Thanks to my wife for the encouragement. Everyone else who's told me over the years that I have to read 1984. Because here's the thing, newsflash, it's bloody good. And part of the reason why I put it off was I thought I knew a lot of stuff about 1984. For example, the song that I sang at the beginning is from a soundtrack that was never actually used, I think, but the Eurythmics, as Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox, were commissioned to write a series of songs for a movie version of 1984, which I think came out around then, sort of 83, 84, with John Hurt as Winston Smith. I think Richard Burton plays O'Brien. I've never seen the movie, but I remember the songs coming out, because then even when they decided not to use the songs in the movie, Eurythmics released this sort of 1984 concept album, of which that song Sex Crime, open brackets, 1984, close brackets, was the first single. And I remembered all this, and I went and looked at it on YouTube before I made this video, and I'm going to link to it below because it's worth seeing just for Annie Lennox's eyebrows, which are, I think, the platonic perfection of platonic ideal of what eyebrows should look like. So go look at that sidebar. Okay, back to the actual book, 1984. I came with a lot of preconceptions. Like, I thought I knew what the thing was, and I know the story, and I did know the basic story, but the only other Orwell I've read is Animal Farm. Animal Farm is a fantastic book. There's a good reason it's assigned to children. And, I remember my Latin teacher, when we leaned back in our chair, would yell at us, 4 legs, 2 legs, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good. When we I'm not going to do this show, I'll break it. But we would sit there, and then he would scream at us, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, and we would know that was the time to ride our chair. Except the one genius in the class who was a very quiet, unassuming child who once responded, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. Anyway, another sidebar. Animal Farm, fantastic, but it's a blunt instrument. It's a fairly obvious metaphor. It works. It's political, but it's blunt. It's a bludgeon, and a fantastic work. And so going into 1984, I imagined more of the same. So first thing that I noticed immediately is it's a bit longer than I thought it was. In my head, this was going to be 200 pages. I think, like Animal Farm, and this is a 300-page novel. Second of all, the thing I want to say is that the writing is just glorious. Forget all that. This is not a blunt instrument. This is a precision, beautiful piece of prose, and I hadn't imagined in my head. I thought of Orwell as a polemicist, as a political writer, and in novel terms, 1984, I thought that was him, and everything else was No, he's a beautiful writer. There's just the opening and the early stage of this book, as Smith is trying to, Winston Smith, the hero, is trying to find his way in the world, and then the early stage of his courtship with Julia, where they go out into the countryside and meet, and the description of the paths they take and the forest. Beautiful, just a really, really gorgeous piece of prose. Other things I want to say about it, I made notes myself because I really wanted to not forget this. Okay, a classic of dystopian literature, fine. But what does that mean? It means that every single thing I've ever seen, I'm talking about me because everyone else watching this has already read this book, but me, every single other bit of science fiction, dystopian fiction, of something imagining a future, everything, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a cartoon, whether it's a comic book, everything owes a debt to what's going on here. Clearly, this is the scenes in this were recognizable because I've seen their reflection 100 times in the course of my lifetime. So to call this an important work is understating it, because for me, who the whole joy now, this stage in my life, having been a reader for 30 plus years, is seeing how everything is connected. Whether I read something, an 18th century novel, or whether I read a brand new work of fiction, everything is somehow connected. That's the beautiful Zen world of expanding your consciousness and being a broad reader. Everything's connected. Of course, I was missing one of the central pieces from which so much emanates. Other thing I wanted, a lot of shagging. So I'm concerned that this is issue or assigned to students, because that early, it's not a sex scene. There's nothing explicit, but it's the contrast between the lack of sex in this world, and then first time Winston Smith and Julia get together, and subsequent times there's a lot of understanding your own body, reveling in the nakedness of another, in the act itself, and the post-coital slumber. All that is very much in. This is an adult book. This is not a book for kids. I don't care who reads it. I'm not trying to restrict the readership. But that kind of surprised me, just because I thought this was a book that 14-year-olds read. Other things I want to talk about. London. Yeah, I was not prepared for quite how London-centric this book is. There's that central rhyme of oranges and lemons, so the Bells and Clemens, which then gets filled out over time. It's a vague memory in this world that Winston Smith inhabits, something he remembers me. It was certainly a nursery rhyme in my childhood. Here comes the chopper to chop off your head. But all the places where each of the ministries sits are rooted in London, and the images he sees through his windows are parts of London. And then the other thing I want to talk about is a dystopian book. Much of what we've seen, sort of some dystopian futures, or where a world sort of totalitarian version of that future, everything is always gleaming and white, and there's that. I'm trying to think of examples of this. There's that movie Equilibrium with Christian Bale, which is a fantastic movie, which rips, absolutely steals the whole Big Brother thing from 1984. But you often see that in the book. It's not like that. This future world is bombed out and grimy, and the tube is still running, and everything's a bit damp and moist and dirty and moldy and rusted. And so it's not that the world has changed and everything's gleaming and bright. Yes, there are the people who live in that world, but the world that Winston Smith inhabits is not that. And I love that the world building here is small. It's not trying to rewrite the whole fabric of society and change everything so that it's utterly fantastical. The changes that go on here, or the changes from the world we recognize to the world of the book set just 40 years into the future when he wrote it, are minute. And that's what makes it so sad. We're so used to world building meaning something on a grand scale. Tolkien built a literal whole other world of Middle Earth, where there were maps and seas to be traversed, and different races and things. And that need for giant world building with new rules or systems of magic or systems of power or whatever it is, I think can sometimes be a trap. Another sidebar, reading it's there. The Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I remember my criticism of it was that there's so much world building, even up to the last third of the third novel in the series. There are new things being taught to us, new aspects of this world that we need to learn and understand, and it's overwhelming. And yet, in the world that N.K. Jemisin builds, where there are different attitudes towards sexuality, different attitudes towards gender, actually, in this massive world that's been invented from scratch, we only meet one bisexual character. There's only one transgender character, and I just, it didn't convince. What we have here in George Orwell is just trying to turn the needle just 5 degrees off due north. That may be a terrible mix. Maybe you turn the needle 5, whatever it is. It's a minute change. It's just a simple adjustment, but the ripple and the effect of that in the building of the world here makes it more real, more tangible, more recognizable. It's just a little bit off what we'd expect. What else do I want to talk about? Yeah, so in the last third of the book, the book's in 3 parts. In the last third of the book is the part that everyone knows. Winston Smith is captured and tortured, taken to room 101, electrocuted, everything done to him in order for him to renounce his rejection of Big Brother, renounce a rebellion, and ultimately renounce Julia. He gets hold of the trigger for him being captured is he thinks he's joining the rebellion, and he's given a book to read, and the book is not a book of how to rebel. The book is just an explanation of how things are, and it's actually an introduction to basic Marxism and socialist ideology, where it breaks down in the most clinical and easy to understand way how the class struggle between what the book describes as the high, the middle, and the low. In the book, it's the inner party, and the proles. And that the infighting between the middle and the high, and how they over time switch, but the low have limited opportunity, limited aspiration even to become members of the party or move into the middle classes. Just brilliant. It reads like an essay that you could read anywhere. The fact that it drives the plot is, I think, astonishingly skillful. So just fantastic. One other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is Emmanuel Goldstein. So one of the things that Big Brother and the party set up as an enemy for everyone to hate is this figure, Emmanuel Goldstein. Now, this book is written sort of 1940, immediately after the war, as the stories of the Holocaust and the genocide and the final solution, or Hitler's final solution for the Jews, is becoming more and more widely known and understood. Let's give some people the benefit of the doubt that perhaps it wasn't before then. It's quite daring and bold to use a Jewish figure as the figure of hate. And in fact, of course, he is Orwell is criticizing the totalitarian sort of communist inner party by having a Jewish figure of hate. It's a critique of anti-Semitism, and I sort of dive down a little bit into a whole of trying to understand what Orwell's relationship to anti-Semitism was. And it seems like in some of his earlier work and some of his non-fiction that there is a fair amount of anti-Semitism expressed, and yet it evolves as his hate for fascism and his rejection of Nazism overtakes whatever personal animosity he may have had. And in 1945, he wrote an essay called Anti-Semitism in Great Britain, I believe, which I will link to below. I found it at the Orwell Foundation. I'm not sure if it's collected anywhere, because I'd love to have my own copy of it. A relatively short essay, I'll link to it below, where it's as good a description of British anti-Semitism as you will find. Some of the anti-Semitism on the left and the ideas that prevail amongst the people who consider themselves on the left and their attitudes toward Jews, and some of that is still this essay that he wrote in 1945, just at the end of the war, and how those ideas have been taken up, and we saw them expressed in Britain in the last 4 or 5 years. So that's kind of interesting as another sidebar. And so that's it. I'll put a bunch of links below. If you haven't read 1984, you probably should. I hadn't. I probably should have, and now I have. So thanks to everyone who encouraged me to do that. The first of my 4 literary white whales, or the 4 literary white whales I spoke about. I'll link to that video as well below, and link to everyone else's. There are other literary white whales. So there are at least 2 more that I would like to get to from that list, which will leave. I'm going to do Bleak House, and I'm going to do Vanity Fair, I hope, this year, and Catch 22. I will dig up a copy because I had a good experience with this, even though people have said that perhaps that doesn't stand up. But I'm sure once I've completed all 4 of those literary white whales, I'll have 4 more. So thanks very much for listening. Thank you for encouraging me always. 1984, bloody good. Who knew? God bless. Bye.